Because we have been covering some of the most powerful dragons in the Forgotten Realms, we are tending to see dragons that are basically at their apex. Dragons that are at their most powerful. It's somewhat rare actually to see dragons that have already peaked but are now in a downward trajectory in their waning years, because as you all know, for a creature of the dragon subtype to be considered a true dragon, it must become stronger the more it ages. The older a dragon becomes, the more powerful it is. Today, however, we're going to talk about one of the very few exceptions, what could possibly be the oldest dragon that we will cover on this channel. A dragon that has lived before Waterdeep, Neverwinter, or even Luskan were settled. A dragon that existed before the Netherese Empire. Today, we are covering Palarandusk, the Gold Dragon, the Unseen Protector. A dragon who is holding on to life by the sheer power of its magic. But before we get into it, Merry Christmas everyone and Happy Holidays! You know that Dungeon Masters often go very much unappreciated. They don't just do all the hard work that it takes to run a D&D adventure, but they also have to pay for all of the necessary books and supplements in order to actually play the game. I know this because I happen to be one of those. D&D just released a crazy statistic that said that DMs account for only 20% of the player base, yet they are 80% of the spenders. That is absolutely insane. So get your Dungeon Master a gift for once by purchasing Sands of Doom, a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons campaign for characters level 1 to level 11 written by me. If you have a Dungeon Master that you love and you want to show them your appreciation, go ahead and get them the book. I guarantee you they will appreciate the gesture, and you might even get some preferential treatment too. Click the link below and check out the Kickstarter for Sands of Doom, an open world adventure where choices matter, with a huge emphasis on purchasing magic items and player-driven exploration. Lord Amu has arisen and raised an army of tens of thousands of undead. You only have so much time before they arrive. What choices will you make? Get your Dungeon Master this amazing book and maybe even coerce him to run it for you. And if you want him to feel especially coerced, try out the DM screen. He can use it on any game he runs with tables that will make his life a lot easier. Sands of Doom on Kickstarter. The link in the description below. Now, back to the video. Palarandusk is a gold dragon that exists merely thanks to magic that keeps its body together. Magic which is now faltering. He exists as a translucent ethereal figure, being able to see and hear, but unable to interact with the material world. It's only when he materializes, which he can do, that he may attack, cast spells, eat, or even talk. Thing is, his body is so old, so damaged, that every second that he spends materialized, his body disintegrates further and further as he slowly loses his bond to reality. It's gotten so bad that he only dares materialize for a few minutes a day, instead choosing to remain in its ephemeral form just to cling to life. But how did this happen? See, Palarandusk grew up in a sword coast that was mostly uninhabited, empty of all of the cities and kingdoms that rule it today. He used to spend his time hunting and eating wyverns, that is, until the Netherese kingdom arose. It is said that Palarandusk was already fairly mature even by the early days of the Netherese Empire, which came up around 5,000 or so years ago. It was at that time that he was captured and enslaved by one of the most powerful wizards of that empire, in particular one wizard named Meleirigoth. The ancient scriptures say that the wizard and his apprentices tested a lot of magic on the dragon, trying to find ways to compel him to do their bidding, to restore its wounds, to lengthen its age. It's unclear the extent of the experimentation, but at the time, this was not at all rare to see. The arcanists of the Netherese Empire were notorious for not really having any taboos when it came to magic. They would enslave and experiment on all kinds of magical creatures all the time, in order to uncover more and more magical secrets. It's actually the reason why they became so strong. Now, if you do remember, the powerful spells that made Cloth, the ancient red dragon, so formidable also came from Netherese wizards experimenting on dragons. So this, again, was not uncommon at all. Now, in any case, the lifespan of Palarandusk was lengthened thanks to these many spells, which then of course resulted in the dragon itself outliving the Empire. When the Netherese Empire collapsed and Palarandusk was granted its freedom, he escaped, but not after seizing and collecting hundreds of spellbooks and magical tomes from the chaos. And then for the next set of millennia, the gold dragon would study those tomes and learn of its magics, experimenting on itself and inventing his own set of spells. In fact, the second level spell, which you know as Dragon's Breath, which was added of course in Senathar's Guide to Everything, is technically called Palarandusk's Breath. It's unclear whether that is a spell that the dragon designed himself or whether it was created by one of the Netherese arcanists thanks to their experimentation with the dragon, but we do know that most of the spells that we use nowadays were indeed invented by the Netherese. The spell, of course, imbues a creature with the ability to breathe fire like a gold dragon does. Now, one such spell created by Palarandusk is Whip Strike, a very scary one. The spell materializes the air around the target and then forces that air to bludgeon them. The spell functions like Magic Missile in that it hits the target unerringly and you can't escape it at all. But I digress. Back in those days, Palarandusk was still a fairly normal gold dragon, albeit just extremely powerful thanks to how old he was and how many spells he had been enchanted with. When Neverwinter was founded and had become this burgeoning, fledgling like new up-and-comer, the gold dragon made the decision to become its protector. This would be when I would consider to be the dragon's true apex, when he was at its most powerful. Whenever armies would come to destroy the city of Neverwinter, Palarandusk would come to its rescue. He would destroy entire orc hordes, he would kill evil dragons before they would get anywhere near close to the city, and whenever the region would get invaded by another rival kingdom, Palarandusk would come to aid it. To the people of Neverwinter, Palarandusk became an icon, a legendary figure, an entity to which the humans even prayed to from time to time. For those in Neverwinter, he was called the Sun Dragon, and this belief in him filled Palarandusk with this sense of purpose and happiness. However, after hundreds of years of constant fighting, of defending the very land he loved, he would become weaker from all of the wounds that he would endure. Quote, "The passing years robbed the Sun Dragon of his strength and suppleness, and young dragons arrived to challenge him for his domain with the frequency of vultures circling a stricken beast. With no fitting, trusted successor as defender of Neverwinter in sight, Palarandusk dared not stand his ground and go down fighting. For that proud gesture would leave his chosen home undefended. He had to hide and devote his time to learning magic enough to survive, and learning it fast. Wherefore, the Sun Dragon was seen less and less in Neverwinter. He had already slipped into legend by the time the Arcane Brotherhood arose in Luskan, and fear of their recognizing of his magical nature and using spells to enslave him drove Palarandusk to disappear." End quote. Palarandusk hid from the world for a time, so that he may study from all of the tomes that he had taken from the Netherese Empire in order to find a way to restore some of his vigor, to maintain some of the magics that his body was enchanted with that were now breaking. And the thing to understand here is that a lot of what made Palarandusk so strong originally were these enchantments that dotted his body, but he really didn't understand many of them. They were put on him against his will, after all. And at this point in time, the spells were shattering, the enchantments were waning. Using his human polymorphed form, Palarandusk purchased an old decrepit mansion in the mountains close to Neverwinter, where he then proceeded to store all of his old spellbooks and tomes, and then he basically just hid from the world in order to study the magics that course through his body. Unfortunately for him, though, his mansion was then attacked. It isn't clear exactly why the attack happened, but it came from a group of adventurers that seemingly either knew Palarandusk lived within or were extremely lucky in the confrontation. They ended up burning. They ended up just like exploding the entire building with fire. Quote, "The attack came without warning, and it destroyed almost all of the aging gold dragon's spellbooks. Palarandusk escaped destruction by frantic use of his spells, but not before his body had been so ravaged by magic that it was only held together by a webwork of shattered enchantments. Whelming all of his magic to save himself, the Sun Dragon rebuilt his own frame, forming the substanceless body of the slowly crumbling unseen protector he is today. End quote. Palarandusk was forced to rebuild himself with magic just to stay alive, which now forces him to exist mostly in this form of ethereal figure. Now, after the incident in this new form that Palarandusk has been forced to take, he finds himself neither desiring nor needing to eat food. Instead, he spends most of the scant minutes that he can materialize absorbing moisture into his body by standing in the rain. This is typically enough to sustain him, though on the rare moments where he does get hungry, he does attempt to find creatures which threaten his land and then eat them. His unique nature has also left him without the need for sleep, and so he never does, though ironically those few who do know of Palarandusk's condition claim that his lack of sleep is actually one of the primary reasons why his life force is draining so quickly. Most dragons of venerable age do spend more time sleeping than awake, and Palarandusk does not. Nowadays, being merely an old legend to those who live in Neverwinter and feeling like he is no longer able to defend the land as he used to, the poor dragon has felt purposeless. That is until he found a town of gnomes high up in the Sword Mountains close to Waterdeep. Palarandusk felt like he needed something. Even if he was overall small in the grand scope of things, his purpose has always been to defend those in need, to protect the helpless, and so he approached this town of gnomes, possessing no more than 400 adults in total, and asked them if they would allow his presence in exchange for his protection, which, in awe, they accepted. The town of gnomes is called Laery Thimble, and it is nestled in a valley up in the mountains called Felrenden. And so Palarandusk's lair nowadays is up there, close to the gnomes that he now protects. Now, I do say lair, but Palarandusk doesn't really have a lair per se. He doesn't sleep, so he doesn't have a cave where he stays, and he doesn't really care much about wealth, whether it is to accrue it or to covet it, so he doesn't have a bed of coin like normal dragons do. The few pieces of treasure that he does possess, he hides under boulders in different parts of the mountain, which he uses to trade for magics which may aid him in giving him the vigor that he requires in order to materialize more often. So if you wanted to find him and interact with him as a player, that would actually be the only thing that he actually would care about, since he dislikes talking to people and doesn't really have any allies. See, all he does with his time is do everything that he can to protect his gnomes. He will stay invisible and just listen to them and observe them. If one of them has to travel down the mountain onto civilization, he might follow them just to make sure that they're safe. If anything, his pastime is to get to know his little gnomes better. So he will listen to their quarrels when they talk to each other, he will spy on them when they think that they are alone to listen to their worries, he will overhear spousal fights, he will pay attention to the children when they play, and of course, he wanders around the town when they sleep. This is why, of course, Palarandusk never sleeps himself, and why his body is decaying faster than normal is because he spends every waking moment safeguarding the tiny little gnomes, and he loves it. I mean, this is why he lives. This is his purpose in life, to protect and to guard. Palarandusk has a very strong sense of duty and honor, and he believes that this is his destiny, to shepherd the land and its people. And so again, if you wanted to interact with him, the only thing that would have him consider an audience would be magic, which would help him regain his vigor. In particular, a specific set of rods. So a while back, a wizard traded spells with Palarandusk, and in exchange, the wizard granted him a set of rods filled with magic, and a spell which allowed the dragon to absorb the magic of the rods onto himself. Now, he has since run out of those rods, however, and so he seeks more of them whenever he can. The actual nature of what these rods are is unknown, though, and the lore doesn't really expand upon them at all, but it is interesting nonetheless, and again, a reason why he would want to meet with players. I should mention though that nobody really even knows that he exists though. It is said that at this point in time, only the gnomes and a very small group of wild mountain dwarves that live in the Sword Mountains know that the Unseen Protector is even a dragon. Other people such as adventurers that pass by the mountains, humans that live in Waterdeep or any of the nearby towns, the sages that have studied the region, all of them believe that the Unseen Protector is nothing but a spirit or some wizard who is using illusion magic to disguise himself. You have to keep in mind that Palarandusk virtually never materializes, and he has been in this form for hundreds of years, so his name has really just faded into obscurity. It would be a complete shock to those who live in Neverwinter to hear what ended up happening to their beloved sun dragon. Now that being said, and I should mention this, he is still extraordinarily powerful. So we have been talking all this time about like how he's no longer the apex dragon that he used to be and how he has deteriorated over time. But again, all of this is mostly just because of the magic that keeps his body together and that it is breaking apart. But he is still a true dragon. And just like we mentioned at the very beginning of this video, true dragons become stronger the older they get, not weaker. And Palarandusk might be one of the oldest dragons alive, so what does that say about his power? Well, Palarandusk has an official challenge rating of 36, putting him just below Inferno. Because he is so old, Ed Greenwood wrote that he had the equivalent sorcerer's power of a level 28 sorcerer, and that is of course on top of this very powerful draconic body. This means that he can cast 7 9th level spells, which I mean, compared to Dorgothoth and Inferno, it is nothing, but compared to the rest of the world, it is shockingly powerful. Now, the rest of his battle kit would be fairly standard for a gold dragon. It is really just powerful claws, bites, and fire breath weapons. His ethereal nature, unfortunately, doesn't really translate particularly well in combat, since it does take a full round for him to transition between his ethereal form and his material form, and he can't really abuse his ethereal form in combat since he can only cast spells that target himself while in that form, and he of course can't do any form of attack while in it. In fact, his ethereal form has a severe weakness. Whenever Palarandusk is forced to go through any physical object, whether it is a house, a blade, or any other person, he takes a little bit of damage, which is no problem, but his total hit points go down by 1. Permanently. If he is ever, say, shot with an arrow while translucent, his total hit points would be permanently reduced by 1. This is the big issue that the Gold Dragon is facing and why his essence is slowly deteriorating over time and why soon enough there won't be anything left of him. He is slowly phasing out of existence. Every encounter he has, every week that passes, his life force drains. This also happens when he attempts to attack a creature while he's still translucent. The attack would deal no damage to the target, but would create a sense of nausea and tightness on them. Nothing that would actually hurt them, however. Now, let's cover a bit about his personality. We haven't talked about the actual person yet. Quote, Palarandusk has also collected philosophical human writings and has spoken with a few elves and dwarves about their own views of the world, with the aim of forming a personal code, end quote. Quote, he does enjoy beauty, such as that captured in the occasional statue or even painting, which might be found propped up in clefts and beneath sheltered overhangs here and there around Felrenden today. Palarandusk lives by his own laws, which he alters rarely, and then only after much internal debate and reflection. He believes that any dragon has a duty to live in harmony with the land, devouring prey only as needful, despoiling things only when ruination can't be avoided, and protecting his domain against damage from such things as floods, fires, and invasions. The key to Palarandusk's character is his light humor and thorough and sympathetic understanding of human nature, operating through a firm personal code. If paladins learned about him, they could learn much from him. He defends the gnomes like a bold and benevolent grandfather, never thinking of its own safety, never employing traps or ruses, and never sleeping, end quote. It is interesting that Palarandusk has a peculiar distaste for traps, considering them to be inherently foul in nature. The concept of preparing someone's demise ahead of time before you can even ascertain the intruder's intention, it's awful to him. It betrays a flaw of character where you have to detach yourself from the maiming of a creature. Palarandusk avoids killing whenever possible, but when he's forced to, he always weeps. Quote, "Although the Unseen Protector could well be overwhelmed if the Felrenden ever became vitally important to the Arcane Brotherhood, another cabal of evil mages, or any alliance of 3 or more dragons, it seems more likely he will soldier on in obscurity for several more centuries before his body finally falls apart. Whether his enchantments will enable him to continue on as a disembodied sentience or not is unknown. But Elminster warns that if it does, the Protector, deprived of any means of defending anything and fated only to watch, could well go insane, and might then pose either a menace to all or be merely a powerless, unseen shadow." End quote. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to go ahead and click the link in the description to check out Sands of Doom. And if you like cool dragons, which I would imagine you do since you're still here on this video, then do make sure to check out the Collector's Edition hardcover book. It's not every day you get to see a vampiric black dragon rotting from the inside out, whose only lifeline is the Anubian relic in her eye, who keeps her alive with its powerful divine essence. Will you get her to your side or slay her for her relic? Sands of Doom on Kickstarter, the link in the description below. Thank you guys so much for the support.